Well, here we are, Renee, out on the road. Our first podcast on the road, part two. What got into us to think that we could do a podcast in the lobby of a hotel? There are lots of distractions,
There are a
Renee.
lot of distractions. And to be fair to the listeners, this is take two of this entire episode because take one didn't go so well. So we're learning, we're practicing, we're doing new things. But we're in South Dakota, everybody. And this section, we're going to be talking about the states that we've been to this year already and some of the themes that we've seen in our talks and in our travels. So today, but we're going to give you the highlights of where we're going through the states at which we're traveled and then talk about those themes. So we've gone to Idaho, Missouri, Indiana, North Dakota, South Dakota. So to kick us off, what about Idaho, Jason?
I'm
What
just going to
got
say
you
this is
excited?
going to be one you're going to want to watch on YouTube because I'm watching everyone walk by
Oh,
in the
you're
lobby. It
distracted.
is just fantastic. So if you're going to pick this one up,
Oh,
I would
don't
jump
do
over to
that.
YouTube and watch the full video because that is just
You're going to be
amazing.
like watching ping pong going
It
on.
has been a busy year, right? We really ramped up our public speaking. We really ramped up who we're partnering with, how we're partnering, the messaging that we're doing, and it's been fantastic. We've got a fantastic response. And so I think, I kicked off the year in Idaho,
Yeah.
which was the first time I've been to Idaho. So that was another personal gain for me of like, this is fantastic. But starting the new year in Idaho, and really that was around a farmer conference, farmer behavioral health. And I was able to share kind of my personal story as a farmer, and how that crisscrossed my professional career
Mhm.
in behavioral health. And so that was just a great opportunity to go connect with farmers and other professionals all over the state of Idaho,
Mm.
and really look at what are they doing to talk about stigma, to really promote the resources that are out there and available for farmers and ranchers across that great state.
And then from Idaho, we went to Missouri. And in Missouri, we're there more for that HR conference, but we always talk about the changes in the world since the big event that happened 4 years ago, we call it, or the pandemic. And we always sit back and talk about like what is different in the world. And some of those things that are really different in the world in those last 4 years include depression and anxiety scores. And we talk about what it is today. So Jason, update everybody on where are we in the world on depression and anxiety
Well,
scores.
there's some good news, right? Since, January, December of this year, depression anxiety is only twice as high
Only
on
twice.
average, down from the 3 times as high on average across the country, than it was pre-pandemic. And so, we're still nowhere near 2019 levels where, the average levels of anxiety and depression across the country were like 11%. We still see fluctuations and variation in states. And it's still such a great reminder, as we do our talks, I love that slide. We have a slide in our PowerPoint that we usually just reflect on that of, what, your staff, your community, your family, we're still kind of on edge. And then we see the natural disasters happening and the other things that are happening around us. And, we have to just take that into account when we're making decisions, when we're interacting with others, because it's still impactful.
Right. And I really appreciate those kind of conferences. It's a different crowd for us, but we're really talking about workforce and the supervisors in the room,
Yeah.
the HR individuals in the room, and just reminding them to help themselves take care of themselves, but also then what tips and tricks and tools they can use to help their coworkers, their colleagues. And it's really, it's a lot of fun. We really love that conference. And we also just really enjoy the impactful conversations that we have. I know we've talked some about caregiving and the folks that struggle with aging parents, and I'm in that boat myself, but there's so many, that's not a topic you hear in HR a lot, but it's a great reminder to people that everybody's human. We're all have parents that are going to pass away at some point. And so making sure that your policies and your procedures are flexible enough to deal with people's life issues. Otherwise, that's the points when jobs turn over.
Yep.
And so if we're talking about retention of workforce, which is such a key issue across everywhere we go, small things like that make a big difference. Just having empathy at work and letting people work through their life issues with you in their work keeps them at work rather than looking for other jobs. And it's an important conversation.
If you're helping your employees manage their chronic stress, it's not going to lead to burnout. And chronic stress happens not just at work, it happens because of everything happening at home. And then you put the two together. And so as employers, you have to recognize where your employees are and where they are in their emotional space. It's not something you can ignore anymore. You can't say, leave your personal life at the door. Those days are long gone.
Long gone. Well, then from Missouri, we went on to Indiana. So Jason, you did the Indiana tour and you added this back to self-care. This is conversation where you added some extra days.
I
Talk about what all happened there.
I did add a few days. So I was, that was one where I had to go through Nashville. So we were lucky enough. I spent a couple extra days in Nashville with my wife, and we went up to French Lick, Indiana, which is one of the largest rural health conferences in the country.
Wow.
Rural Indiana, it was really a great opportunity to see some great history.
Yeah,
French Lick is where Larry Bird is from,
absolutely.
and everyone
Only reason I know about French Lick.
Everyone knows that. And so there is a huge, gigantic venue and historical hotel, and so much rich history there. People from all over Indiana go there,
That's cool.
usually once a year with their families, some world-class golfing there. But, it was really great to see a state who takes health so seriously. And so
Yeah,
their governor showed up at the
that's
conference.
cool.
And so, Governor Holcomb came and talked, sincerely about what he's done around health and healthcare and health access, health inequalities. And so it was really refreshing because we don't always see a state pulling together and succinctly saying, this is what we're going to do about opioids. This is what we're going to do about suicide. And to hear that type of leadership at a conference like this, I have to say was refreshing because we don't always get that.
Right. If you think back when we did work on a 988 project, Indiana was one of the ones that was kind of taking the lead in that
Yeah.
space as well, and had really got that down into the regional
Yep.
levels and were really talking about it. So that's great. And so from there, I think it was
Well,
North Dakota.
Well, wait a minute. We have to talk about a few of the stops on the way
Oh,
to and
stop.
from,
I forgot.
and
Stop
so
from
in
Indiana.
case you've missed, it wasn't just visiting, a sports bar with all Larry Bird's memorabilia, but I was able to go through,
Didn't you see Cooters something?
I did, it did. There was a small
Generally-
Dukes of Hazzard stop that I'm not
Okay.
allowed to talk about.
Why?
Well,
That's
Jennifer's banned
hilarious.
me from talking about that. But we also were able to go to Santa Claus, Indiana. And so there is a complete Santa Claus,
All right.
Indiana, where
You're allowed
Christmas.
to talk about Santa Claus, but not Dukes of Hazzard.
I know
That's amazing.
I know it is kind of.
I love it a lot.
It is kind of bizarre, isn't it? But again,
You've got to go to Crazy Cooter's little.
we did. We
I
saw
think
the
it's like a
General Lee.
garage and the
Yep,
General Lee.
that was all there, and so
I've been there. So
you know,
get to
I-
talk about it because I just made you. Sorry.
it's right across from the Grand Ole Opry,
Well,
so
you can't really miss it.
you can't miss it. So you got to do some of those things when you're out and about, and
That's the whole point.
to be able to mix, work that's really fulfilling alongside, some stops along the way. It was a great opportunity. And so, again, another one of those learning opportunities that you could turn it around and also be a great time to take a break and rejuvenate.
Well, yeah. Well, and then you've got more stories of the around the world chores that you did for North Dakota, but you went to Grand Forks first for business.
Oh,
and
I spoke in Grand Forks. I was at a health
Grand
conference in Grand Forks, and
we got
again,
to see some of our old friends from
old
working in
friends.
North Dakota.
Yeah,
We've
we
been
got
working in North Dakota as my business since 2012. So we've been up in North Dakota for quite a while for
Yep.
working. So you've got some old friends.
we got
that
some
can
old
get to
friends
see.
in the legislature we got to see as they were given their kind of rundown, and it was great to reconnect. It was a lot of fun just to be up there and then to see people we've worked with in the legislature up there.
Absolutely.
Was just fantastic. But I had to do something else, right? Because that wasn't enough.
Not never enough.
And so I looked at a map, and I don't know if you're all aware of this or not, but there's a place called the northernmost point. It's similar to the southernmost point in Key West, and I've been there, but I've never been to the northernmost point. And so I
why
thought
wouldn't you miss
this would be a great photo op, and it's only like 3.5 hours away.
only?
And so you just have to run through Canada to get there because it's disconnected from the rest of the United States. So it's the
Right.
northernmost point of the continental United States, but you can't get there in the summer. In the winter, you can actually go across an ice road, but in the summer, you actually have to go through 20 miles of gravel through Canada. And so that was just absolutely a great, fun experience. And it reminded me of what rural really is, because there's 100 people that live there year round.
Yeah.
And there were 4 kids in the one-room schoolhouse last year.
Right.
And so if we want to think about a place where their resources are limited, they're actually disconnected from the rest of the United States
Yeah.
by that lake. And they're following the same laws and rules and the mental health system, because I always think about mental health, right? That's designed in St. Paul and Minneapolis.
Oh,
And so how do you think that translates when you go to a really rural, remote area?
right.
And so I really just I found it fascinating having conversations with folks there about how they meet their own needs, of how they self-sustain themselves. And so just a great couple-hour visit I had.
Yeah. And for those that are listening, no, I did not go to North Dakota this time, but I'm about a dozen trips further along to North Dakota than Jason. So I don't
Right.
feel bad of letting Jason go
Yeah.
by himself. He has a few more to catch up.
Yep.
And then we came to this great state of South Dakota, where from which we are podcasting today. And this has been just an amazing trip. We've had a really good time. We talked before about our stops on the way to get here, but South Dakota, but now let's kind of focus on some of the themes that we're talking about at some of these conferences. So rural health conferences have the similar themes,
Yep.
even though you're in different states. So name one of the themes that you've noticed that are kind of from South Dakota, Indiana, these tours. What are the themes that you're seeing that keep coming up in rural community conversations?
Well, really that the headbutting between our healthcare system and our behavioral healthcare system,
Yeah.
or lack thereof,
Right.
right? The lack of interconnectivity, the lack of connection, and that's really consistent across the country, that
It
we
is.
haven't found a way to treat the whole person. And our local rural hospitals are really struggling to figure out how are they going to be able to do that, or are they even able to,
Right.
because they aren't funded to and the systems aren't designed
Right.
for them to work together. And you often talk about they're actually designed not to work together.
They are.
And so that's causing a big problem. I always reference back to the report that we now know, the 2030 report, where rural communities are now asking for substance use and mental health care.
Yeah.
More so, they're more concerned about that than they are primary care. And we can throw that article in the show notes. And I think that really tells a story, right? Rural communities have always been worried about having access to primary care.
Yep.
But for the first time, rural communities are saying, you know what? We're not worried as much about primary care as we are behavioral health and substance use treatment. That says it all.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I don't think rural communities are adequately responding to that.
Oh, the blank looks on faces when you brought up that document and showed them, and you could tell people hadn't made those connections yet.
Right.
And so, I mean, and to be fair, everybody listening to the podcast, Jason reads data that nobody else reads. And so it's pretty common that Jason says, well, of course you've read this article about such and such. And I always shake my head no, because I have not. And most of the room is with me that no, they haven't. So it's really kind of fun and important for us to bring this cutting edge information to them, because they often don't have the time. To be fair, you're a small hospital, you don't have time to read all of these Pew studies and maybe even, the Surgeon General's report from last year on
Right.
isolation. You want the Cliff Notes version, so we can bring that to the audience
Right.
and give them value and show them.
Right.
And what's great about it is they can then take those sources and maybe use it for why they want to create a new program, or why, the justification for, we need to do this work because this article and this research shows it.
Mhm.
And so we can bring that to them. And then we, of course, because Jason's such a data nerd, we always have all the sources in our documents. And so people really can go research it for themselves and not just believe us because we make
Right.
stuff up, So, so that way they can go back and look. But it really is helpful to them. And so that's been part of sort of the gift that we bring to communities when we have our conversations is, here's some research that'll help you in what you're working on, which is a really important conversation. So besides that, a couple of the other themes I'm sure that you keep hearing about are housing and
Right.
workforce.
Right.
So, but we heard a different housing kind of spin in South Dakota than we've had other places. And I thought that was interesting. You want to talk about that?
It was interesting, wasn't it? Really, the housing conversation went to housing staff.
Yeah.
And nurses
Interesting.
and, even mechanics in communities of
Right.
it's really working class folks, because there just isn't affordable housing. And that's limiting communities more than
Yeah.
anything else. And so there's been some really interesting ways of building duplexes and sixplexes, and leveraging some federal and state funds just to be able to get people to move to the community. And I still, I think we still have a lot of areas to address when it comes to housing. And as we think about social drivers of health and what creates healthy communities and how we support people,
Mhm.
housing's number one. And so I think it's really interesting that hospitals, rural hospitals are really taking the lead on figuring out some housing issues. So I thought that
Yeah.
was refreshing.
Yeah, and it really was some cutting edge ideas, because in some places it might be, a duplex, or sometimes it was 3 individual homes, and it was by man, the collaboration that went into that. They were talking about the layers upon layers upon layers of funding, the number of partners involved. It was just really kind of a cool story to hear that they're doing it and taking
Mhm.
responsibility and ownership for that and bringing people in. And again, that then helps, stabilize the infrastructure and it stabilizes the workforce and then allows them to then provide for everyone else who needs the services.
Now, on the flip side, when we talk about workforce, we have to be honest about the redundancy
Yes.
and misuse of
Yeah.
workforce that we see everywhere that we go that only contributes to these compounding issues, right? And so a lot of times we see workforce that just isn't utilized. And I always go back to, asking people, do you have people with lived experience
Yeah.
working in your facilities? How
A
are
lot of
you?
blank stares in this state about that.
We did.
Did they even have that program? I now want to know. I'll look it up
Well,
because if they have it, they
right.
certainly don't use it very
Well, or they could use individuals that maybe they hadn't thought about hiring before, right? And so sometimes it's a kind of just a practice issue.
Yeah.
But I was at a conference when I was in Indiana. A nurse said, I've offered that we have peers in our community that want to work, they want to support people in the emergency room. And so, as we have people come into our ED who've overdosed or who may be suicidal, they just need somebody to sit with them.
Right.
And so we have a community of people with lived experience who are saying, we would like to come do that.
Yeah.
Hire us to come do that, or we'll even volunteer to do that. And the hospital administrators said to her, that's too risky.
Right.
We can't allow those people in our ED.
Right. Which is sad just
Oh.
before you continue the story, because the current people sitting are your high level administrators,
Right.
or your high dollar
Or
other positions that are
Right.
doing,
Or-
overpaid or
Right.
overtime and all of
or
that.
people are sitting alone.
Or they just
In-
don't have any support.
Right. No support, and people are spread thin in the ED. Nurses can't be in every
So
room.
instead of doing all of that, which is a terrible idea, they don't want to bring in people with lived experience who actually would be better at the job.
Right. And would help to de-escalate situations that would make
Right.
the volume more manageable.
Right.
There's so many reasons why you'd want to do that. And so I asked some more probing questions as we were having this conversation. And I said, well, does the hospital allow volunteers in other areas? Because usually when I go to a small hospital, there's a volunteer at the front desk. And she's like, oh, yeah. She goes, actually, we'll let anybody come in and volunteer and hold the preemies in the neonatal unit.
That's crazy.
And I said, well, wait a minute. Your most vulnerable population, you'll let anybody off the street to come and be with.
Right.
But yet the folks who are at their worst point, on their worst day, who are depressed and suicidal, you won't let someone come in and sit with them. And she goes, I haven't thought about it that way. But yes, that's what our administration said.
Yeah. And that's just so sad because, you're really wasting. I mean, talk about resources being misutilized. You've got people just being in the wrong places at the wrong time.
Right.
And I know another area that we've talked about this, and we see it in our own state, is who is required to be on mobile crisis teams.
Right.
And you also have some licensed folks, and some places insist upon having a licensed person on that
Right.
team, when that is not at all how it was
Right.
built or why it was
Right.
required. And so you can think of a lot of places where
Right.
it's just the wrong person in the wrong seat.
Right.
And then they're complaining that we don't have blank.
Right.
We just learned about, where were you just talking about the 2 psychiatrists in one town that didn't have enough work to do?
That was here, a rural hospital. The administrator, he had just taken over there, came up to me after I spoke yesterday, Renee, and said to me, hey, I've got a hospital. They must have listened to your talk. How many years you've been doing this? Because they took it to heart. And it was a small hospital in the very corner, like on the border of Nebraska and South Dakota. They had 2 child and adolescent psychiatrists.
Which is amazing.
It was unbelievable.
Nobody has.
But they weren't being utilized.
No.
And so then you have this other problem now where, and I'm like, well, I'm like, really?
Yeah,
They weren't being utilized?
And they
to help?
wouldn't let them do telehealth to use the rest of their hours. So they're just underworked and just sitting there, and the cost has to be astronomical.
And so they're losing money. And so
Right.
here you have a small area that's over-resourced. And so it's just, how do we do a better job of having conversations, of working together, of connecting people? Because, it was kind of a knee jerk. I'm like, whoa, I've never heard someone say, oh, we're so overstaffed with psychiatry.
Right.
We're going to have to lay people off. That's not a conversation that I've ever had. And then to yesterday have that conversation with a hospital administrator, it was very confusing. I just have to be honest with you. I didn't expect it.
No. So part 2 today, we just went through like all the different states that we've been to so far. Don't worry, we've got a lot more states ahead of us for the rest of the year. But today we talked about Idaho and Missouri and Indiana and North and South Dakota. And just some of those themes that we're seeing are pretty consistent across those states. You see challenges with workforce, challenges with housing, challenges with just understanding how people themselves are feeling and how you handle your own anxiety and depression. We're all the same in this area. And so we just want to remind everybody that, we're in the same boat as everybody else. And as the flooding and the different types of climate change events are happening, there's going to be more and more piled on. So just be aware of that and know that we all need to be paying attention to what's going on around us. But before we go, I want to do my recovering politician self-care policy of the week. And this too is about travel. But when I travel, I have figured out that I still need a routine and a schedule. I am not good if I'm going to try to present or try to be even just sitting at a conference and paying attention. If I'm staying up all night, if I'm out, drinking and doing things that I don't normally do, my body doesn't respond as quickly as it used to. And so I have to still kind of stay in a routine. That doesn't mean I can't stay up a little bit later. I mean, here it's really light, really late. Goodness, it's still
Oh, the sun is
daylight.
still up at 9:30.
That's crazy. So I have to use the darkening shades to go to bed. But otherwise, it's like I get way out of whack. So Jason, what did you think about this? What you do in schedules and stuff with travel?
Yeah, I have to stay on my regular routine. And so I'm kind of, I've turned into a morning person as I get older, but, I need to be up, check my email, have a cup of coffee. And so absolutely sticking to that same routine. And so it can be challenging sometimes, right? You're working all day, and by the time you find a restaurant, find something to eat for supper and get back. But absolutely, I've kind of fallen down a little bit. I didn't run while I was up here, but
I didn't
sometimes it's hard to kind of fit everything in. And so, but sticking on the same routine is so important to keep regular and keep everything even keel. I think so oftentimes we talk about this over and over again. Sleep is so important.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely, to stay your sharpest, you have to get the right amount of sleep.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Next time, we are going to be on our 1-year anniversary of this podcast. Can you believe it's been a year? Jason?
No, because I remember telling you I'm never going to do a podcast.
And here you are.
Here I am.
So next time we're going to do the best of the year. Can't wait to see you then. Have a great day, everybody.